Well, well, I'm glad to, is it up working?
Just try it.
I'm glad.
Go ahead, try it. Yeah,
it's good.
Go ahead, try
Is it? Well, I'm glad that to address that question, because I really do want to say I disagree quite strongly with virtually everything Paul said. I do not think racism is a major explanation of the Tea Party. And the truth, at least one, I do not believe that racism is a major explanation of the Tea Party. And in particular, I don't believe it is an explanation of what happened yesterday. And the proof is that the same electorate that just 2 years earlier had voted 53% for Barack Obama, same person, and had elected 258 Democrats to the House of Representatives, this year turned around and voted whatever it will wind up 240 odd Republicans. It is about economics. What they don't like, what the Tea Party doesn't like about Barack Obama is his policies. And for virtually every example of supposed racism that Paul gave, I can give you a counterexample. For example, he talked about the problem of linking Reverend Wright to Barack Obama. Does nobody remember Jerry Falwell? Jerry Falwell was the leader of something called the Moral Majority, and every time he would make an outrageous comment, he was a reverend, by the way, that's why I'm drawing the parallel, everybody would say, Ronald Reagan must believe that because, you know, Falwell endorsed Reagan. Similarly, are there birthers? Yes, sadly there are. There were also people called truthers during the entire Bush administration who believed George Bush was in on the planning of 9/11. I similarly think it is just ridiculous for anybody from the left in Massachusetts to accuse somebody else of moral certainty. You yourself said we're smarter than those people. Your belief in, and somebody, a couple of you people I saw shake your head and agree, that notion that we're smarter does not only extend to facts, and I would dispute that point as well, it also extends to moral truths. People in Massachusetts believe that they, or at least the left believes, they have the right answers to abortion, immigration, gay marriage, affirmative action, death penalty, school busing, the wars in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Vietnam, the minimum wage, the role of religion in public life, and they don't say, gee, maybe we're right, maybe we're wrong. They say, we've got the right answer, and if you disagree with us, you're racist, you're nativist, you're intolerant. So I think it is a matter of economics. It is partly, as I said, a simple matter of results, which is to say virtually any philosophy looks better when you've got 5% unemployment than it does when you've got 10% unemployment. But it is also, I think, a legitimate feeling on a lot of people's parts that the government has grown too big, that we have too large a deficit. I think the reason a lot of people rejected the health care plan is not, as Professor Dukakis correctly said, that they don't want to extend health care to working people. What they believe is that this is not the appropriate way to do it, and that that in particular, most working people in this country have health insurance. What they don't like is the cost of it and the bureaucratic morass connected with it. And they think that the Obama health care bill will only make both of those things worse, which is to say, the bill basically extended coverage to everybody who didn't have it. It punted all the issues of cost control. And it made the ridiculous claim that they would reduce the bureaucratic morass by assigning all kinds of powers to a very complicated structure in the federal government. That's why so many people not just on the far right, but lots of ordinary Americans are opposed to this health care bill. And I don't think, to repeat, that it has anything to do with nativism, racism, Islamophobia, etc.
Quick comment, Paul, and we'll take it out for audience.
Well, there goes my future with the political science department at Northeastern. Let me make 2 points. One, my general point is this. Elections are important, and I know we just had an election, and everybody's talked about where the votes went and so forth. But to me, this is bigger than an election. See, we can talk about who voted for Obama last time and how they voted now. But everybody wants to focus on the notion of who won an election, and that's the marker of where our society is. The important way to evaluate Obama is not when he won and lifted his hand on January 20th, 2 years ago. What happened to him after? Right? What happened to him after the cheering stopped, after the election? I think that tells us just as much. Look, I study elections. I think that tells us just as much, it doesn't explain everything, about the forces afoot within the society, about the ways you respond to people who attempt to argue for change, whether they make it or not, who have the audacity to put themselves forward in the way they did. So my point is not, I study elections, but I think there's a tendency for people to say the argument ends, well, of course, they voted for somebody else different, that's the answer. Yes, elections are important, but they don't explain everything. And I think there's a tendency for us to want to think that that's what they're about. And then on the larger point, and Bill makes a legitimate case. Look, I plead guilty. I understand there are different positions on issues like abortion and social issues and so forth. But I plead guilty. There is a right position on homophobia. There is a right position on nativism. There is a right position on Islamophobia. There is a right position on racism. And I'm sorry, I plead guilty.
The old saying is where you stand depends upon where you sit. And I view the world through many prisms. And one of them is having been in city government, and one of them is having lived in Jamaica Plain, a few stops away in the Orange Line now for 21 years, which has become the South End with trees. And there is a constant here. The constant is that not all grassroots organizations are good things. That in the 70s, just as there were grassroots organizations that were fighting for equal rights for women and preserving Roe v. Wade and all those kinds of things, there was a grassroots organization called ROAR, which was a true grassroots organization with no dues. You just showed up at a meeting. And they sucked in a lot of people in public life, including some nice people who were scared because they were so powerful. And in the same sense, there's a fantasy that's sort of, in many cases, emanating from academic institutions that people can go out and use cities as a sociological sandbox and organize and create new institutions where I would argue in a place like Jamaica Plain, what has happened in the past 20 years is that those folks have disenfranchised working class poor people who they may think they're helping out by in fact making a community where there are no Catholic schools, there are almost no churches, there's no cheap restaurants left, and in fact the poor people who were the descendants of the people who worked in the breweries and the shoe factories no longer feel welcome. And that's as a result of grassroots organizations of the left, which are as bad, in my opinion, as grassroots organizations of the right. See, I pissed everybody off at the same time.
By the way, Costello's isn't that expensive.
Few of them left.
That's
Oil's
true.
not cheap.
Oil's not cheap anymore, that's right. But oil's went uptown. All right, let's open it up.
My name is Luke Hill. I live in Rosendale.
Which the very fact that Rosendale is fancy is a statement unto itself.
Very good.
Yeah.
I'd be interested to hear you talk about the differences in the electorates of 2008 and 2010, and to what extent that explains the differences in the outcomes of 2008 and 2010. I saw online today from a Democratic strategist named Ed Kilgore some numbers that, if I recall correctly, the electorate was a quarter or more smaller than 2 years ago. The African American percentage of the vote dropped from 13 to 10%, Latino from 9% to 8%. I forget some of the other numbers, but just the fact that, and this is true in general, that the presidential elections we have a larger electorate with a somewhat different demographic makeup. To what extent does, in your view, did that play a role in the outcome yesterday?
Billy, want to take that?
There is strong I mean, I haven't yet seen a good breakdown, and we won't really have the best data until the census releases its survey, and that'll take us about 8 months these days. Let me say in general that the midterm electorate is always smaller than presidential electorate, and it underrepresents or it tends to have fewer of at least some of the groups that supported Barack Obama, like at least some of the evidence I've seen to date suggests there were fewer young people who voted. Having said that, it's worth remembering that a very similar electorate in 2006 voted overwhelmingly for Democratic congressional candidates. And the more significant finding is if you compare 2006 and 2008, the Democrats lost ground within just about every demographic group. So the point is not just that the groups were different, or the weighting of the groups was, or the size of the groups was different, but that they lost ground within older people, within younger people, particularly within independents and some other kind of relatively moderate groups. Independents at one point, voted for Obama something like 60-40. They went about 2-1 Republican yesterday.
I'll give you 3 numbers. 234, 111, 152. In November 2008, 234,000 people voted in Boston, presidential election. Obama wins like 3-1. Long lines. I don't know if you vote in the evening. I voted 7 a.m. But for people who vote in the evening, waiting out there in the cold and the dark. 1 year later, most contested mayoral election in a generation. Front page stories in newspapers, TV, radio, poll workers, everything. 111,000 people vote. Same city. Same city. And then in the Brown, Coakley, in January with snow in the morning, 152,000 people voted. And that means there, in fact, are many different electorates. And I haven't seen the stats. I'm assuming the number for this election in Boston was closer to the 152 number. That's my guess.
Yes.
And what that means is that in those presidential years, young people vote because even if you're from New Jersey or someplace like that, you're an American, you know who the president is, they don't vote for me. And the mayoral turnout tends to be whiter, more Irish, more Catholic, older, more public employees, more conservative, and it's one of the reasons incumbents tend to do relatively well in that constituency. And the other variable is, I think, Governor, when you were in your second term, the number of Democrats in Massachusetts crested at like 49%. It was just about 50%. The Republicans have hovered between 12 and 15% for about 40 years. That unenrolled number keeps nudging up. My contention is those are people who make the decision to not be a member of a political party. You can argue whether that's good or bad. And they want to feel free to move back and forth, and they do.
Okay, question.
Thank you. My name is Eric Schoenfeld. I'm a graduate student here at Northeastern. Kind of a question just about kind of the party system, I guess. I'd say this is kind of a jump ball to anyone who wants to take it on the panel. With this election, I was up till like many of you to the wee hours in the morning last night watching the commentary. A theme I picked up on suggesting that people were voting for a lot of the Republican candidates simply because it was an alternative. They were being contrarian. They could have voted for a monkey if they were there. You know, we have an independent governor in Rhode Island, in Chafee. Murkowski presumably will be an independent senator from Alaska. Is this maybe the emergence? You know, the Tea Party was able to, you know, put their candidates in instead of these establishment candidates. Are we starting to see maybe the emergence of a real third party? And maybe is this election maybe kind of the start to shift for people to say, you know what, we can vote for, you know, someone other than a Democrat or Republican that reflects our values, and they may actually have a chance at achieving office.
Either one of you guys want to take that?
Let me just tell you a couple of facts, okay? Just to show you how sometimes people vote Republicans straight down the line. There's an obscure entity called the Governor's Council of Massachusetts. And there's a vacancy in the district to the south. And the Democratic candidate was a gentleman named Oliver Cipollini, who I've never met. And because he was worried about a guy, he was from Fall River, I think. He was worried about a guy from the Cape winning the Republican primary. He put his brother, whose name is Charles Oliver Cipollini, up as a Republican. He wins the primary, and then the guy who doesn't want to be in the Governor's Council, who's a Republican, beats his brother with almost the same name, who's a Democrat. That's what happens when people push that party level. In 1990, same thing happened. 14 Republicans elected the state Senate. One of them, Irving Wall, was a Bible salesman from Taunton. And in his qualifications, he listed he was a member of AAA. And Tom Larkin, right? Larkin, good guy, was register of probate in Middlesex County, beaten by a lady who was signed up in the unemployment office. And Howie Carr calls her up the next day and said, "Congratulations, you're the new register of probate." "Oh, was that what I signed up for at the unemployment office?" What do I do? Okay? Doesn't have a salary. So you get those aberrations. But the good news is that when you have those aberrations, people tend to get back to as the middle. And I tend to think of some of those that happened yesterday as aberrations, not long-term trends.
People of Maine rejected an independent candidate for governor. And Maine is a place where we've had at least 2 independents in the last few
He's
decades.
the best candidate, my brother said.
Bill, do you want to?
And as a result of that rejection, they elected a very conservative Republican governor. So I don't think this is a trend there. I think it's just one of those things that happens. And I think Chafee's a pretty good guy. And Rhode Island has lots of political problems.
But I can say, Eric, you are right, though. I looked at the ballots in Massachusetts this year, and I think for the state legislature and for the constitutional offices, I counted 65 independents or third-party candidates on the ballot. These guys have been around a lot longer than me, but at least from my experience, that's a record. Now, they did not win, so I think you're right that there is this notion out there, but of course it's very hard, particularly in this state. I was going to ask as a question, a bonus question, who's the last independent to win major office in Massachusetts? But these guys, I'm sure, know the answer. You know the answer? Joe Moakley.
Joe Moakley.
And most people don't think of
1972.
exactly. Most people don't think of Joe Moakley as and so that's the last time we had an independent win a major office in Massachusetts.
Paul Tierney was elected Register of Deeds in '76 against the 6th as an independent.
That's like register of probate.
And let me just say, can I just say, as long as I've been in political science, I have been hearing people say, geez, everybody's upset with the existing parties. Surely we're going to have third parties. Never happens. And the basic reason is because of the structure of the electoral rules, which basically gives you nothing for coming in second or third. And so if you are a backer of a candidate like Tim Cahill, you are put under great pressure to get off and support one of the candidates who has a real shot at winning. And yeah, every once in a while we elect an independent, but not often. Of the people going into the new House of Representatives, I don't think there's a single independent.
There is an interesting twist on your question, Eric, and that is not to whether a third party emerges, but whether the emerging Tea Party movement, however it's defined, how it defines the Republican Party, if it does. I mean, that's the more interesting question, because we've seen in American history that these kind of movements have emerged, whether it's from the left, we have the Democratic Party in the 60s and 70s, or from the right in terms of the Republican Party in the 80s and 90s. So the question, I think, one of the interesting questions we will have to wait and see is whether there are legs on this, whatever we want to call the Tea Party movement. Okay, next question. Speak in the mic, please.
Okay. Mike George from Massasma, can you hear it?
No, it's not on.
No, it's not on. It's on. Yeah, can I just speak loud?
Yeah, speak loud.
Great panel, nice mix of academics and practitioners, a lot like ASPA. Which is one of the unique features where you get, practitioners get an opportunity to get out of the day-to-day, and academics get some exposure to the world of practice. Policy advice for the governor. I think it's fairly well, it's good to assume that there is still a $2 billion deficit in this state. Maybe there's not, but with stimulus funding and rainy day funds being used, I'm wondering what advice might be in how to approach that problem. And if you want to talk also about the federal, because even though, you know, the federal government can print the money, I think there is a deficit there too. And I would be interested in both the practitioner and the academic point of view.
The question for those who couldn't hear is the governor, you know, Governor Patrick, and at the state level, of course, the president at the national level will be facing serious deficits. So,
Well, first, I'm very skeptical about this $2 billion figure. You know, when Bill Weld ran and won in 1990, he said that he inherited a deficit of $1.3 billion. In fact, I left him with a surplus of 234. But it was a very effective message. He inherited a message, so on and so forth. So I know there's a $2 billion deficit out there. And in point of fact, in fairness to the governor and the legislature, they've managed this fiscal situation remarkably well. Let me tell you, nothing is worse, if you're governor, than trying to navigate through a national recession. It's not your fault, you had nothing to do with it, and you get all the crap. You got to cut, you got to tax, and nobody's happy. But they've managed things pretty well. Now, I disagree with somebody, I don't know who was on the panel, a little bit. Even with this Republican House of Representatives, you've got a whole bunch of new Republican governors who are going to face serious fiscal problems themselves. And I wouldn't be surprised if, when push comes to shove, the National Governors Association, 50-0, will be pushing the Congress hard to come in with some kind of additional countercyclical revenue sharing to fill that gap. The second thing, and again, I don't know who said it, I think it was Larry, is that I think it's 40% of the budget is health care, not 30.
Into the 30s.
And so what kind of financial obligations we have at the state level will depend very heavily, Mike, on whether or not the government and the legislature can get serious and effective about cost control. Because if they do, then the anticipated inflation of 8, 10, 12% that we've been seeing in a no-inflation economy for years on the healthcare side will no longer be a factor. And that has a profound effect on the state's healthcare spending. Obviously, if you can get health costs under control, then the rate of inflation in Medicaid, which is the largest portion of this health piece of the budget, is a whole different ballgame. So, and I know the governor in his victory speech last night talked about health cost control as being one of his priorities, and I know it is. So there are a lot of variables here. The other thing, and I'll wrap up with this, is that this is not a robust recovery, but it's a recovery, and state revenues are recovering also. So state revenues are up 2.5 or 3% in this fiscal year. That's not huge, but it's a hell of a lot better than the kind of steady declines. State revenue dropped by $2.5 billion. And when you throw in all those tax cuts that my successors got through, most of which were worthless, that was $4 billion in lost public revenue. I mean, there's been a huge chunk out of here. So the fact that there will be some modest growth in state revenue, which I expect will continue, is a huge change. And given the administration's experience over the past 4 years, they're going to be able to navigate through this with, I think, some substantial additional federal help, including, by the way, some federal infrastructure money, which I think even a Republican Congress will vote for. Much tougher, more effective health cost control, and the kinds of skills they've developed in managing to do this and to navigate through. Furthermore, and I just conclude with this, we've had some extraordinary leadership from the Ways and Means Committees in the House and Senate. People don't talk very much about it, but Charlie Murphy from Burlington has been an excellent House chairman, very smart guy, very capable guy, and Steve Dukakis, who comes from a distinguished ethnic background, has really been a first-rate Senate Ways and Means chair, and you can't minimize the contribution that those folks have made, and the Speaker of the Senate President to this. So, so I'm not that pessimistic about the revenue side of things. Obviously, the condition of the national economy has a profound effect on this. If the economy starts picking up more rapidly, then you're going to see a lot more revenue. But I don't think it's $2 billion for one thing, and I think they're going to be able to navigate through this. But it must include some serious and effective health cost control.
A crisis is a horrible thing to waste, and my fear would be that if things do start getting better, people will not feel the pressure. We actually done extraordinarily well compared to most other major states. You have to thank Finneran and the people who set aside the rainy day fund, okay? That's one of the reasons we have, and they've made tough decisions together. And I think that had Deval faced this kind of a financial situation in his first or second year, he would not have handled it as well as in the third or fourth.
Any comments about the national level before we go? Okay,
Yes,
couple more questions, okay.
My question actually is at the national level. Given the structure of Congress, where do you think there are areas of agreement? What can we get done in Washington in the next couple of years? The president today at his press conference talked about education as one possible area, and I'm wondering what your thoughts are about that and other areas as well.
I have to say I'm skeptical that there's going to be a whole lot of cooperation. They're probably they can probably get together on at least some kind of a mild deficit reduction package, since I think Democrats will feel some pressure to go along with something like that. You know, the Republicans are willing to support, say, an expansion of charter schools, as long as it doesn't involve more money. You know, for all the talk about cooperation, it typically doesn't last very long. And I'm real skeptical that it's gonna. It won't surprise me at all, for example, if our budgets are basically based on continuing resolutions for the next.
If I can say one thing, both at the state level and at the national level, just at the state level, it just reminded me when the governor was talking, and this is a political sort of examination. You know, we've had a lot of Republican governors in this state. The interesting thing I thought about this particular campaign is the basic mantra of Republicans getting elected in this state to the corner office has been what? The gang of three. That both houses of the legislature and the governor, they're going to be rubber stamps of each other. You did not hear that in this campaign. And why? And this gets to the revenue question. Politically, Deval Patrick's position on casinos, I think, had a tremendous political effect. Because on the biggest, most visible issue during the election season, the casino, they were not a rubber stamp of each other. I think it's an argument you can still make, but Baker would not make it, because on that biggest issue out there, there was not this rubber stamp. So I don't know what, casinos is something that people are jumping to respond to this situation. Deval held the line in some way, and I think politically, I don't know about economically, but politically it helped him. And on your larger question, I don't know the answer to this, but I urge you to look at the big exit polling that was done yesterday by Edison Research. This is the big group that did polling yesterday, and it used to be the Voter News Service, and now it's Edison. There's some interesting information in there, and the one that caught my eye, just talking about missed opportunities, it really caught my eye. I believe, and I didn't believe it, but I got it over there and I could check to be correct. 8 out of 10 Americans said that they are opposed to having the Bush tax cuts extended to people making more than $250,000. Think about that. And this was an opportunity before the election by the administration and the Congress to push an issue where 80% of the American public agreed with their position. They thought it was unfair to extend tax cuts to people making $250,000, and they blinked.
I think we have
Two
a
argument.
Two other areas where there might be bipartisan cooperation. One of them is job creating infrastructure. And I think you'll see the governors pushing hard for that, Republicans as well as Democrats. And the other, interestingly enough, is community health centers. Don't ask me why, but Republicans like community health centers. They don't like any of this other stuff, but they like community health centers. George Bush was a big fan of community health centers. Orrin Hatch was a big fan of community health centers. And the new National Health Plan has another $11 billion in it to double from 20 million to 40 million the number of people that get their care from community health centers. We have 29 in Boston. They're terrific. So, and that may end up being the perfect public option with bipartisan support. Now, that's not a huge agenda, but a couple of areas where one other point, and that is this. As Bill Clinton discovered when he got a Republican Congress, the president has a lot of executive authority. No, we're not going to get cap and trade, but the EPA has plenty of authority to act administratively and to require polluters, producers of global warming, gases, all that kind of stuff, to do things. And I wouldn't be surprised, I don't know if you remember, but in his closing couple of years, Clinton practically doubled the size of double the size of the National Park Service by using this monument statute that goes back to Roosevelt to acquire huge numbers, take over huge numbers of acres of land. So I would not be surprised at all if we didn't see the president moving on stuff which he views or considers to be important and popular, and to use his executive authority to move on that, whether the Congress is with him or not.
I think we have time for one more question. I apologize to everybody. Bob, go ahead.
My question has to do with leadership. And one of the things that, and I agree with a lot of what's been said about why Charlie Baker was unsuccessful in his campaign. But one of the things it seemed to me that the governor did very effectively was undercut Charlie Baker's strongest argument. That is his record of leadership. They undercut what he did as Secretary of A&F with the Big Dig issue, and they attacked him on what he did at Harvard Pilgrim. So he essentially lost that leadership platform. One of the things that seems to me that's happened on the national level is that the Democrats, Barack Obama having won, could not define the leadership role in getting through this tough economy. I think Larry's right. People understand that there's a tough economy. I think they've seen Governor Patrick having us move through this economy and managing it well. The Democrats on a national level couldn't define the direction through this economy to give people confidence. So to what extent do you see that leadership role being an important factor, and what advice would you give to Governor Patrick as he takes on this new term in helping us get through what will be a difficult economy?
I'd suggest that he be bold early, he challenge people to take tough votes, and he never look back. And so the real problems that happens to people in public life is they spend far too much time dealing with what happened the first year, the second year. I think he's off to there's an enormous potential to have almost be catapulted in years 5 and 6, and then around the time of the 68, the power starts disappearing. And, considering, I introduced him at an event in April, and I referred to him as Lazarus. And he was sitting and he said, "Shall I rise?" And I said, "Yes." And considering that a lot of people had written him off, he rose. And he did it because of his personality, because of his optimism, because, in fact, he did not say some of the things that maybe all the hired guns around him wanted him to say. He elevated the position of governor above what some other people were bringing it down. And I tend to think, maybe I'm still an idealistic young man, that stuff sells. And I think that's one of the reasons he came out on top.
Can I second Larry's comments exactly? I think Deval Patrick ran, and no offense, Governor, the most effective campaign in my experience here for major office. And for Barack Obama, I think he could learn something from looking at the Patrick campaign. From the ground game to all of the elements that people have talked about, the way he presented himself and so forth. I just thought it was a masterful campaign. I think he had a tough case to make. And I followed the debates, and the debates have a rhythm. The first part is like a diagnosis of the problem. It's like going in to see a doctor. And the diagnosis was pretty tough. And everybody agreed, including the governor, by the way. But there's also a next stage, which is now what do we do? And usually incumbents fall off the chair at that point. They have difficulty sort of doing that, and that's when, of course, the challengers dive in. In this case, Baker figuratively fell off his chair. And this is where Patrick rose. And he gave people a sense that, yes, we are in crisis, but he gave people a sense that, to use the Barack Obama analogy, that the car is damaged, the car is broken, but he's the best person to fix it. And that, I think, was an amazing trick to pull off. The one voter who captured this more than anything for me, and you try to get a voter that captures this, in Ashland, the bellwether community. And there was a guy coming out of the voting booth in Ashland and asked who he voted for, and he said Patrick. And said, why? He says, because I had a sense that Patrick was a guy who had a sense of calm in the midst of crisis. I think that's what Patrick conveyed effectively.
Last word from Bill Merrick.
Well, I was just going to say, I basically agree with that diagnosis of Patrick. I think, speaking as somebody who didn't vote for him, I think he really learned a lot. I mean, I think if the election had been held in 2008, 2008 he'd have lost. Mm-hmm. But he learned a lot. He governed better. I mean, it wasn't just that he ran a better campaign. By contrast, I think Obama has not governed terribly effectively. And if there's one thing one lesson I'm drawing from the last two presidents is that experience really is helpful if you're going to be president. I think the Republicans made a real mistake in nominating a guy in 2000 who had, at the time, 6 years of experience in what was actually a weak governor state, and had no clue how to govern.
No clue, period.
I'm not sure, but the Democrats, wait a minute, excuse me, let me continue. I think the Democrats made the same mistake. They nominated a guy who had zero substantive legislative accomplishments in the U.S. Senate, who hadn't done much in the Illinois Senate, or Illinois legislature, had never run a large organization before, and I think that inexperience has shown. Will he learn? There are not a lot of politicians, in my experience of studying them over 30 years, who actually do know how to learn from experience. Most of them repeat the same errors over and over again. Bush, did he learn much? Maybe. I mean, the only decision he made a little better in his second 4 years than in his first 4 was the decision to rethink Iraq, in my view. I'm not sure, but that is to me the key question going forward is will Obama learn from his mistakes?
Let me just say that I disagree with Bill substantially on this. I think Obama has governed pretty effectively. I don't think he's been communicating very effectively, and Bill's description of Obama is precisely the description we heard about John Kennedy when he was running for the presidency. I think Obama has the capacity to learn, and will do so, but time will tell, and the American people are going to have to make a decision about that in 2 years.
And I will use my role as moderator to first thank our panelists. For a lively and insightful analysis of our election. And also, again, my prerogative as panelist, as moderator, to refer to a politician who I know did learn from experience. And despite his admonishment to us tonight, we're going to sing him happy birthday anyway. So everybody join me in wishing Mike Dukakis happy birthday. 1, 2, 3. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Michael. Happy birthday.